Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's AAJLJ meeting. We're very pleased to present today's program, Update on Turkey, Syria, and Israel after the Gaza War, Deconstructing New and Worrisome Developments. We're also delighted to have Ilana Katan moderating today's program. Ilana is a member of the AAJLJ board, counsel at Hogan Lovells, and a recipient of the AAJLJ's 2024 Pursuit of Justice Award. We are very grateful for Ilana's leadership and for her guiding today's conversation. Before I begin, I also want to note that tomorrow is, of course, one of our very important days. It's the International Holocaust Remembrance Day at noon Eastern. We'll be having a webinar with Professor Michael Basler. So please, if you can, join us for that. I'm sure you'll all be joining a lot of programs in the next few days. And on that, if you're not a member of the AAJLJ, we invite you to join you. And with that, Ilana, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you everyone for being here. I'll just give a brief background on our speaker today, and then we'll kick off from there. So Mark Meirowitz is a lawyer in New York who also teaches American foreign policy, among other subjects, at SUNY Maritime College. He's an expert on Turkish foreign policy, Turkish-U.S. relations, and Turkish-Israel relations. His chapter analyzing Turkish-U.S. relations was recently published in a major new book on Turkish foreign policy. He appears frequently on Turkish and other international media, commenting on topics related to U.S. politics and international relations. So thank you, Mark, for being here today. Mark will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes or longer if we don't have any questions, but we will allow time for questions. So if you have any questions during the session, please put them in the chat and we will cover them during the Q&A portion of the session. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you very much, Ilana. It's a tremendous privilege to do this for AAJLJ. It's a fantastic organization, and a big shout out to Alyssa and to Rhonda for all the great things they do for AAJLJ, and I consider it a big honor to be involved in this and to be able to give a presentation or presentations to the group. This is a very highly movable and moving subject. It is always changing, and I'm just going to try to bring everyone up to date, and I do urge and encourage questions at any time, and just put them in, as Ilana says, and we'll take them as they come. And thank you very, very much for the opportunity to do this. Now, so I just kind of a big, very, very, very big picture of where things are in general in the world today. And then I'm going to narrow down into Turkey and Syria and Gaza, which is related to this as well. And of course, Iran, etc. So we have a number of world crises underway. Obviously, the Ukraine crisis. We have the Greenland crisis. You can call that whatever you want. The president is very focused on Greenland. We had Panama. We have Venezuela, where the United States has grabbed Maduro, and of course, Iran and many others. But while all this goes on, my friends, very little focus is placed upon the situation in Syria, which is a cataclysmic situation, a horrific situation for the people in Syria. It is not being reported. I can tell you that someone actually put an interesting tweet on X, whatever, about a picture of the UN Security Council and asking the question why the Security Council has not taken up the issue of the massacres and the literal civil war that is going on in Syria. And just to recap that a little bit, as you might recall, Bashar Assad's regime was toppled, and it was toppled actually by a very small jihadi group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, headed up by a guy by the name of al-Shara, Ahmed al-Shara, whose actual real nom de guerre is Ahmed al-Jalani, which means what it refers to is the Golan, Jolani, in the sense that he originally, his family had olive groves in the Golan. That should give you a little idea of where he's coming from. He was actually arrested as a jihadi. He was put in Abu Ghraib. He has a long, long history of affiliations with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and so forth. Now, why, just to start at that point a little bit to understand why he was able to take power in Syria with about 35 or 40,000 jihadis or fighters. And the reason for that is really what we talk about, which is how the worm turns or the levers change. And that has to relate to the fact that Israel actually is the cause of it, because Israel took out the Syrian defenses, took out the Iranian defenses, and with the United States bombed the Iranian nuclear sites. And also, Russia was distracted. Russia had bases in warm water ports in Syria. It was distracted by the war in Ukraine. So as a result of that, al-Shara or al-Jalani, with his small band of jihadis, were able to actually topple the Assad regime. Now, to bring that forward a little bit, the question was when al-Shara, and again, you have to understand, because we're talking about Turkey as well, that it was Turkey that really sponsored al-Shara. Turkey has been sponsoring al-Shara for many years and actually backed him when he had kind of a little, I don't know, his little caliphate in Idlib. And what happened was al-Shara was able to mount, with Turkey's support, a takeover of the regime. Now, the question was, what would he do with this newfound power? So this was an interesting question, and nobody really knew. And if you read in the news, you would see that al-Shara was dressed like he went to Paul Stewart, or the Turks actually gave him clothes to wear. I actually am trying to dress like him. He's a fantastic dresser, and looks good, and was talking really nicely to everybody. And then the question was, who is this guy? And is he for real? And is he still a jihadi? And what's the deal? Well, in between all of that, he had an opportunity to meet with President Trump, and with the backing of MBS of Saudi Arabia, President Trump removed all the sanctions on al-Shara, which had been placed on him as a jihadi, including a sanction on him personally. This was removed. That was $10 million on him, and then sanction on his organization. That's because Saudi wanted that, but Turkey wanted it also. I just wanted to explain, so I don't forget, why Turkey has said, and I've heard it from diplomats, obviously, he's the go-to guy. They wanted him to be the go-to guy to organize the government. Why? Because the Turks want a stable Syria. They do not want a refugee influx like the one they had under Assad, where they had about, I think it's 3 to 3.5 million refugees fleeing from Syria. Those refugees are in Turkey, and the Turks want them to go back to Syria. They clearly can't go back to Syria if Syria is destabilized. So this was the idea. Al-Shara comes, they prop him up. He's the go-to guy. The only problem is that since his inception as the leader of Syria, and of course, he put together a structure of government, a constitutional committee. And for my colleagues in the law, it's very interesting. It's very reflective of our 250th anniversary that we're celebrating, the founding fathers and all that. And it gives you an interesting point. How did our founding fathers do it? How did al-Shara do it? Well, the way al-Shara did it is he appointed a committee which didn't conclude really any of the minorities in Syria. They made up a memorandum or a charter. And essentially, the way it works is that this committee establishes a parliament, and then he gets to appoint people in the parliament. It's not inclusive. I think at the time they did this committee, there was one woman on it, really almost no Kurds, maybe one Kurd, no other minorities, the Alawites, Christians, Druze minorities not included. And interestingly enough, in that committee memo or charter, it said, and this was a question actually that was asked to him when he was interviewed by The Economist magazine, are you going to adopt Sharia law? And the way this ended up, his answer was in the interview, well, if the committee says Sharia law, I'll adopt Sharia law. Well, okay, cut to the chase. The memorandum, the charter says the law in Syria shall be Sharia law. Now, this is very problematic because, I mean, the Christians, the Druze, the Kurds, we didn't even know about the Alawites, but, you know, that was a very big problem. Secondly, when they were putting together the charter for their new, the newfound al-Shara regime, the question was, should it be called the Syrian Republic? It originally was always called the Syrian Arab Republic, right? So the minority said, the Druze, the Alawites, Christians, Kurds, they said, well, it's a multi-layered society, so let's name it the Syrian Republic. And al-Shara said, no, we're the Syrian Arab Republic. And why is that? That was pressure from Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Syria is an Arab country. It's always been an Arab country. Okay, so take the picture where we are. He puts together a Potemkin parliament. He puts together a structure. He says no elections for 5 years. And then came the descent into disaster with the massacre, which I'm sure you read about, massacres of the Alawites being the Shiites who supported Assad, Christians massacred, and Druze. And we follow that a lot because we know that the Israeli Druze are close involved in Israeli society. They fight in the military. They have ministers, judges, you name it. And the Syrian Druze were being massacred. By whom? Well, that's an interesting question. Is it al-Shara's military, or is it ISIS people working with al-Shara? We really don't know. And this will be an interesting comment for my colleagues in the sense that, was this intentional that he sent the troops to massacre the Druze or any of these other groups, or was he basically just looking aside, or wink, wink, he let them do it? But at the end of the day, we had these massacres. The United States, Secretary Rubio condemned them. But where do we go from there? So the most recent iteration, which is what you see in the paper now, has to do with the Kurds. Now, the Kurds, as you may know, are a very disparate group. They are spread out along this region. Essentially, they have never had a state. Right now, they have I would call it a de facto entity in Iraq called Kurdistan, which actually is allied with Israel and Turkey and so forth. And then the Kurds are dispersed in many countries, Azerbaijan, Iran, in Turkey, huge Kurdish population in Syria. The Syrian Kurds basically have been fighting with the United States in Syria with CENTCOM against ISIS, and they lost about 11,000 soldiers. And by the way, they have what's called the YPG and YPJ. The YPJ are women soldiers who are extremely courageous. They remind me very much of the women soldiers of the IDF, very courageous. And they were fighting ISIS. They were able to imprison many ISIS fighters in a prison in northern Syria, including setting up a facility for the wives and children of the ISIS fighters at Al-Hol, which, by the way, now has become a hotbed of radicalization. And they've been protecting and controlling those prisons. Now, where are we now? Now, the al-Shara regime has decided, with the facilitation and the encouragement of our ambassador to Syria, Tom Barak, that we must stop the American interaction with SDF, which is what is the name of the force, which has been protecting these prisons. And as he said specifically a few days ago, America's reliance on the Kurds to keep these prisons is over, terminated. And we're going to go to our go-to guy, who is al-Shara. Now, what has the result of that? The result is 3 American soldiers have been killed by ISIS fighters, maybe Syrian soldiers, we don't know. And a few hundred ISIS detainees have escaped, maybe with the assistance of the Syrian soldiers. And now CENTCOM is withdrawing or moving many of the ISIS prisoners to Iraq because they're afraid that those prisons will fall apart. Why? Because the Syrian military has commenced and successfully squashed and taken the dams, the water resources, and the oil and gas resources from the Kurds. And right now, as we speak, the Kurds are now in a city called Kobani, and they are, I don't know where it stands at this moment, but they're basically cut off from electricity. There's no water, no food. Now, what's this all about? Well, the point is that there was an agreement between the Syrian government and the Kurds, and the question was what to do with the Syrian Kurdish forces, this SDF force. This is a hardened force, 100,000 fighters, what to do with them. And al-Shara said, you must, pull apart your military units and have your individual soldiers become part of our military. And the Kurds said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to keep the integrity of our battalions. And then by a rush, which was caused by our ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, special envoy to Syria, Tom Barrack, he then came along and moved this needle and said, you got to do it now. And then the al-Shara regime, with the backing of the United States, was pushing the Kurds to do this. And then this broke out into full civil war. Yeah, I just want to side, I would say, just for all of you to keep in mind. Here is Kobani, which is encircled by the Syrian jihadi military. Understand this. And can you imagine? Nobody is protesting on any. Did you see anybody on the street? I know it's snowing, but I see anybody who's been protesting, saying, how do they dare commit ethnic cleansing against the Kurds in Kobani? Has anybody heard this? I haven't heard it, because there isn't any such thing. It doesn't exist. And this is a shocker. And that the United States is facilitating it is very, very problematic. And let me just divert for a second and try to see why that is. And the reason is, and let's just be candid, despite President Trump's tremendous accomplishments, which obviously getting the hostages out of Gaza, bombing the Iranian facilities, grabbing Maduro and hitting back against Venezuela's narco-terrorism, he's not focusing on Syria. He's focusing on Greenland. This is not a criticism. This is just an observation. And what he has basically done is outsourced this issue to an ambassador who is making these momentous decisions which are affecting the future of the region. Now, why is this important? Because Israel sits astride of Syria and has the Golan Heights. Israel has taken Mount Hermon, as you know, as some piece of it as a buffer. And originally, Turkey was going to come in and take some bases. Israel destroyed those bases. So the fear is that we could have an actual conflict between Syria and Israel, or Turkey and Israel, which would be very, very cataclysmic. Now, in about 22 minutes, Ilana, did you want me to take questions, or are there questions? Rhonda, I do not have the information on the population to give you off the top of my head. Rhonda wants me to give all the populations. I mean, Turkey's population is upwards of 90 million, but the numbers I have, and in terms of the Kurds in Turkey, probably 15 million, very significant, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head all the numbers of the Syrians and the Syrian groups. I don't have it.
Thanks,
Did
Mark.
you want me to go on, or did you?
Please go on. Yep.
So basically, the question is, what is going on in the region that should be significant to us? And I think again, I wanted to turn for a moment to the Gaza peace board too, because I think that is very, very relevant to all this as well. I'm sure you've all read about the Gaza peace board. And I don't know what people think about it, or whether they think it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it's a very perplexing proposal. If you read the charter of the Board of Peace, and if you read the memo or the letter that was written by the Palestinian technocrat who's supposed to head up the Gaza Peace Initiative, there's one big thing that's missing from the Gaza Peace Board, and that is Hamas. It's not mentioned anywhere. Now, and also, what is the Gaza Board of Peace? Now, the United Nations established or approved in a resolution the establishment of the Board of Peace. But when they established it, it was limited to Gaza. And what President Trump, basically what it is that it's actually an ongoing infinite board in which President Trump is going to be chairman for life. You can join it permanently if you, I guess, pay over $1 billion, pay $1 billion, or if you get a 3-year membership term, it's one state, one vote. And it's actually going to be some kind of a mini UN. Now, why does Trump do this? Trump does this because I think he wants a legacy after he leaves office. Fair enough. But at the same time, how do you solve Gaza without dealing with Hamas? And then came the question of whether Turkey and Qatar would be able to, they want to offer troops to be part of this mobilization, this rehabilitation force. Israel has objected to this mightily, and that's now in play. I wish there were questions because I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, I do lecture to students, but
Mark, we do have a question about the Gaza Peace Board. Can you talk about the different supporters within the U.S.? For example, has the State Department taken a position, and is it consistent with the administration's position?
Oh, no. The State Department supports the Gaza Peace Board. The State Department, obviously, it's the president's initiative. They support the Peace Board. The question is, what is the nature of the mandate of the Peace Board? In other words, is it focused on Gaza? If so, it doesn't mention Hamas. And if so, would you want Turkey and Qatar to be in the forces, military forces that are in there that are supposed to enforce the peace? I mean, there are a number of open ends here. Secondly, if it's a mini UN, then I would say, and I mean, you know, I personally was on the board of the United Nations Association years ago. The UN is a big, big, big disappointment, I think. So if you're going to set up a mini UN that has one state, one vote, like the General Assembly, and no veto and no fuse box to stop this board from doing anything, it doesn't work. And you know, everybody's piling on to join it. And so how does it really work as a structure? You know, lawyers always think, you know, like, what's the structure? How does it work? Is there an institutional, way to organize this? And I have to say, and I think many of us here would agree, we do want peace in Gaza. We do. We want peace, but we know better that peace, as we know, peace at any price, right, a la Chamberlain or otherwise, does not work. And you need to have Hamas in this document, but it's not in the document. So yes, the administration, of course, is pushing it, but they may be pushing it, Ilana, because they want the legacy for President Trump. If that's what they want, then I think I'm going to be wary about it.
Okay. And we have a number of other questions as well. So
Lovely.
Same question that I just asked. Can you talk about the different supporters within the U.S. and what the State Department's position has been, but with respect to Syria?
Right. Well, there's not the State Department, but I see here also someone's asking about Israel. So what is it? I'd like to touch on Israel first, because that is a very interesting, almost a Talmudic question, because, we don't know. I mean, in the Twitterverse, There was people ruminating, Israel made a deal with Syria not to get involved in this basic smashing of the Kurds. Ambassador Leiter said, no way, impossible. Israel's not doing that. Of course, that the best position in international affairs today is to blame Israel for everything and anything that goes wrong or anything that goes right. It's Israel's fault. So I think Israel's position clearly is it does not want Turkish military in Syria or military bases, clearly. And that relates to your other question, which is, what about Turkey being part of NATO? And that is very significant. Now, I read today, for example, that Damascus is going to have a Turkish air radar system. But more importantly, as a NATO member, if Turkey's a NATO member and there is a conflict with Israel, that means that Article 5 could be invoked and all the other NATO members would have to go to back up Turkey against Israel. I mean, this is one of those, nightmare scenarios. So Turkey and Israel are deconflicting. They have meetings. Syria and Israel are deconflicting. At the end of the day, the way in which taking the Druze, for example, and that really impacts Israel, because the Druze in Israel are very, very upset about what's going on in Syria, obviously, and with the Kurds as well. So I think Israel is being pragmatic about this. I think they have to be. But I think at the end of the day, let's just look around the region. Is there anybody else stepping up here to do anything? If Ambassador Barak is the one who is squishing, to use a legal term, the minorities, then I mean that's the ambassador. And this is my point about outsourcing. I think the president is doing a great job. I'm a great admirer of the president. That's not the point. Okay, no politics on that. But the point is, you don't outsource your policy to an ambassador. Ambassadors are supposed to implement policy, and they're also supposed to be a weather vane to tell you what's going on the ground in the country. Their job is not to go and say, Kurds in Syria, your time is over. We don't need you anymore. The government of al-Shara will now take care of it. This, to me, is an abdication of focus. And that turns us back to the State Department, because that was exactly the question you asked. Because the State Department and Secretary Rubio should be in this 100%, should be in it, and they're not. Because again, Barak is a friend of the president. There's nothing wrong with the presidents have always reached out to their friends for consultation, to take care of things. This happened with JFK sent RFK to Gromyko to do the work on the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's perfectly fine. But not to have someone there basically saying, this is what the Wall Street Journal, they call it Tom Barak's Syrian Adventure. This was yesterday or the day before. Read this thing. It says Turkey wants the Kurds of the SDF crushed and as soon as possible, but America need not facilitate it. What is the rush to, besides the abandonment of an ally? These are allies. The Turks are very upset at one point when the American CENTCOM officers were wearing a patch, a SDF or YPG patch. Now, one other aside, very important. Now, just to explain again, Turkey's point of view on this, which is important to understand. They want a stable Syria for the reasons I explained. But at the same time, they view the YPG, which is the Kurdish group in northern Syria, as an appendage of the PKK terrorist group in Turkey. Now, the fact of the matter is the United States lists the PKK as a terrorist group. They have killed civilians. There is no excuse for that. But the YPG, which is actually, again, as I said before, they're all different Kurds around the world. The Kurdistan in Iraq, you've got tribal groups, Barzanis, Talibanis. You've got in Turkey, you've got 15 million Kurds who are very integrated into society, and maybe not happily, but they even have people, they have a minister in the government. But then you have the group in Syria who are Marxist-Leninist group. They have a different philosophy. And bottom line, friends, they're not in the terrorist group of the United States. They're not in the terror. But Turks insist, and I've heard this myself, I've heard it, that they believe with great confidence that YPG and PKK are linked and that they're connected between Syria and Turkey. So their motivation is they do not want to create a statelet or a Kurdish state. I need to make an aside on this to understand the plight of the Kurds, because the Kurds were promised a state in the Treaty of Sevres in the early 20th century. And then they got screwed, my friends, when Turkey was able to rebuff its invaders and the Treaty of Lausanne. And since that time, no Kurdish state. The only state, by the way, that anybody ever motivated, no Catalan, no Palestinian state, of course. We have a big movement for a Palestinian state, which has no boundary, no definitive government, is in the middle of a conflict. That one, the great majesties and geniuses of Europe have stepped up to say this is the cause célèbre of the time. But the other groups around the world have never had a chance. I just wanted to make an aside to Somaliland. I'm sorry, a lot of asides, but that's a good one too. Somaliland declared its independence in 1992, has a definitive border, has an actual government. And can you imagine? The world is in an outrage. The United Nations outraged. How could Somaliland declare its independence as a state and be recognized by Israel? What an outrage. So I say as follows, and I don't think anybody here will be surprised. You'll have a hypocrisy here, and I'm afraid it's not just hypocrisy, but abandonment in terms of Syria. It's also distraction. And this is not a criticism of anybody. But the truth of the matter is, look at the polls on Greenland, okay? Hey, look, Greenland is very important, no doubt. It has strategic significance, no doubt. But this is the issue that is being focused on by the American administration when there is a disaster occurring in Syria, in the region, which could literally, and really, Gaza is a good example. Syria could deteriorate into another ISIS situation, into a jihadi regime, no question. Now, what is the well, the president's reaction is, well, al-Shara, he's a great guy. He's a great guy. He's got a rough resume, but he's a great guy, tough guy, great guy. Well, I understand the president's motivation. He does not want a war in Syria. Does not want a war. He's busy with other issues. I get it. Ukraine, obviously Venezuela, all these things are very important. But Greenland? And to fight with Greenland and to check. I mean, again, the national security point of it. I mean, I had my foreign policy, you mentioned, Ilana. I had Mike Faby as a guest speaker. He writes for Jane's, and he had just visited Greenland earlier in a few months ago, and he did like an article for Jane's, and he said, has anybody here been to Greenland? There are no roads. It's only ice. It's just a bunch of hunters and fishermen, natives. All the things that the president wants to achieve could be achieved and would be achieved. It's going to be achieved under our treaties, under our relationships with the European countries. It is, again, there's a kernel of truth to everything. Yes, the gap is important. Yes, Greenland's rare earth minerals. Yes, yes, yes. But you put that on a scale next to the humanitarian catastrophe and the potential for Israel to be pushed into a conflict in the Middle East after everything that occurred. I scratch my head. I don't get it. And the question on the State Department, I think, was very, very good, because bottom line is, where's the State Department? And even on Turkey, the Turkish Diplos tell me, the State Department is AWOL. There's nobody there to talk to. And the reason is because the president has outsourced a lot of the things that he wants done to his friends. It's Witkoff, it's Barrack, and all these people. I have the greatest respect for them. I'm sure they're great businessmen. I'm sure they're great at making deals. But when you're dealing with al-Jolani, he is not the guy he's not on war. He's not the art of the deal. His book is called The Art of the Jihadi. I made that up. All right.
We have another question about Syria, and I know there's one in the everyone chat as well. But before we get to that, could you talk a little bit about Iran's and Qatar's leverage involving Syria?
Well, it's not Iran. Oh, Iran, okay, so Iran was very heavily involved in Syria. And essentially, Israel kind of eliminated that, and also by eliminating their defenses. And when al-Shara gave an interview to The Economist magazine, he made it perfectly clear. He said, Iran will never come back into Syria. Because remember, Iran, the Shiites, were allied with Assad, Alawites, and were persecuting and killing al-Shara's people, or the Sunnis. It's interesting, though, if you think about it, right? Here's Assad, allied with Iran, Alawites, Shiites. They get, defeated. The worm turns. Now it's Sunnis. And guess what? Now they're persecuting the Alawites. Do you see how incredibly ridiculous this is? All it is just, it's almost like you reverse the dramatis personae in the play. You just say, okay, now the main person in charge is the Sunnis, and now they're going to persecute the Alawites, just like the Assad, the Alawites in Iran persecuted the Sunnis, which was al-Shara. He's getting revenge for that. That's a very bad idea. But at the end of the day, what al-Shara said also was, Iran is never coming back because they were after him. But Russia might come back. He said Russia might come back. Russia wants those warm water ports, and Russia, sneakily, as we know about the Russians, they are sneaking back in. They're restricted, but they're sneaking back in. So, I think I answered it. I think I did. Hopefully.
You did. There's also a question back on the Greenland topic about whether Greenland could be a cover while other work is being done covertly or behind the scenes.
Well, I don't know what covertly and behind the scenes about Greenland or something else or what. I mean,
I'm assuming it's about Syria.
Oh, Syria. Oh, I see. Okay. If there are any covers here, the only cover I would see is to cover what we're doing with Iran. I mean, that one, we know that, yes, I agree. It could be. It surely is true. Okay, let me put it this way. There are two interpretations one could put forth. Interpretation number one is the president really wants Greenland. He really wants Greenland. He wants it so much, he said he was going to take Greenland. So either take him on his word, okay? The second interpretation, which Rhonda puts distraction, okay, there's a two, there's actually three. Second is distracting you from what he's really doing in Syria or Iran. I would be the one, I'd say that's the distraction, because we're not doing anything in Syria except abdicating our responsibility to the people there to help them with CENTCOM, to help our allies. That's what we're doing. The last one is imponderable. Again, I think that covert work in Greenland was a bust. That one, he got a pushback on that. And the Greenlanders, they don't like the Danes. But suddenly, after all these years, the Danes colonized Greenland. Suddenly, when the United States expresses interest in Greenland, the Greenland people go, oh my God, we love the Danes. We don't like America. It opened up I know it's a Pandora's box, but it opened up a whole avenue of discussion that's totally unnecessary. I want to say a word about Europe. Europe is moribund. It's gone. Look who leads Europe. And you have to remember, that's why the United States is so pivotal. We cannot rely on the European nations to bring peace in the world. We can't do it. I was in London in November, and actually got to go to Prime Minister's questions. And the whole thing, they're never that interesting. The cabinet wanted to kick out Keir Starmer. He is so disliked in the country, including in his own party. But when it comes to a Palestinian state or getting up against talking about the United States, he is Winston Churchill. Can you imagine? It's a bad example because he's like the teeny little nothing. And Macron, so basically the world is in a bad situation where the United States is indispensable. So if we are pulled apart by many issues and we're unable to focus appropriately on the fires that are burning around the world. And if we could have achieved the rare earth minerals that could achieve we have the treaties easily achieved, okay, without saying, I'm taking Greenland. Then the Canadians pipe in, and that's a whole other disaster, right? I mean, they are, to use a legal term, they're the Shanda of North America. They're just horrible. What happened to Canada? Canada, the greatest friend of the United States with the world's longest peaceful border. We have all these enemies now. And who are the enemies? Our allies. So, I understand the motivation, but it's not always distracting from something you really want to do. But if tomorrow the president attacks Iran, they will all say, wow, you see, he was doing that to distract us. But until that happens, because the president said on Iran that help is on the way, and is help on the way? So we don't know. And I want to say about regime change in Iran, if I may, Ilana. Regime change in Iran is anathema also to Turkey. It does not want regime change in Iran. And the reason it does not is because there's a large Kurdish population in Iran, and they would have, again, an influx of millions of refugees. If the regime collapses, we don't even know how that's going to play out, and there's a civil war or attack by RGC and so forth, we'd have refugees coming into Turkey. And so, Turkey does not want a destabilized Iran or a destabilized Syria. They're willing to live with, as a Turkish diplomat told me once about Iran, I asked him, what do you think about it? And there he said, Mark, we live in a very tough neighborhood. And so Turkey, as sitting where it sits, in the middle of, and also having two continents and sitting in the middle of a hotbed, is faced with decisions that it needs to make. That, of course, does not excuse its positions on Hamas, obviously. That's a whole other thing. Maybe you want to talk about that as well.
Well, just before we, I guess, finish, maybe not finish, but we have at least one more question on Syria, and it's, without being naive, is there a silver bullet for Syria?
I don't know what a silver bullet. I mean, I think the key to the solution of this problem, and this also relates to the problem between Turkey and Israel, which has a very, very, very bad relationship right now. And this occurred after October 7th, because I can tell you from personal observation that, in September 2023, President Erdogan, I heard this with my own ears, was going to go to Israel, September 2023. Then came October 7th, and then everything went down to disaster. And then we had all of this, the rhetoric and everything else that happened, Hamas and the killing of, it's just horrendous. Plus the antipathy and the malevolence that we've seen against Israel and against the Jewish people, and everyone here knows about that. So to my mind, I think the way, if there is not a silver bullet, but maybe what we need is to dampen down the tension between Turkey and Israel, because in the region, Syria is not a powerful nation. It has internal issues. Iran, we know the situation in Iran is very complex and could deteriorate. Lebanon is not a fully functional state. The only states that are really functional are Turkey and Israel. And they have a very, very, very terrible relationship, and they didn't always have, but at least let's not try for the entente. There was an entente years ago, Turkey and Israel. I know I used to be friendly with a former Israeli ambassador to Turkey. He described what it was like. It was fantastic relationship between Israel and Turkey. Now we don't have that. We have, and in fact, in the halcyon days, El Al complained that more people going to Israel from Israel on Turkish Airlines than they were going on El Al. This is their big complaint, okay? So those days are over, all right? Even at the height of Mavi Marmara, even at the height of the tension, Turkey never cut the trade and all the relations remained as they were. But since October 7th, things have really deteriorated. The solution that we need, and maybe this is what Alyssa is asking about silver bullet in general, is this, I think, the I don't know what you mean by silver bullet, but I'm going to talk about a solution because a solution to everything. And a solution to everything is to create a détente between Turkey and Israel and Syria and dampen down the tensions between them so we don't end up with the dangerous development of a direct conflict, which is catastrophic. Again, my point about, here's a fire burning over there. You don't send somebody who, you don't send your buddy to handle that. You send the State Department. You focus on it. You get Netanyahu and Erdogan into a room and you tell them to cut it. I mean, look, you have to, there's only one person in the world that can do this, and that is the president of the United States. There's nobody else who can do this. To sit them down and tell them, you see, you need, this is what you want, this is what you want, this is what you want. And I'm not advocating pressuring Israel. That's always was the policy of the United States, not a good policy. But the advocating the fact that Turkey certainly wants F-16s, F-35s. Everybody wants something from the United States. You need to détente. That means that lower tensions and stop this complete malevolent rhetoric and stop this, the fear that in each country today, in Turkey and Israel, the view is, it's been written in the press, it's been written in the Nagel report in Israel, if you follow that, the greatest, says the Nagel report in Israel, the greatest adversary and danger to Israel is Turkey, and in Turkey, the same statement, the greatest adversary to Turkey is Israel. This is a recipe for disaster between the two countries, who are really two substantial countries. The imbalance is with the fact that Turkey's a NATO power. So you just cannot go there and think about that, because that would not be a symmetry. That would be totally asymmetric battle. And it would invoke all kinds of problems. I wanted to mention, just as an aside, if you look at the region right now, the latest thing that Israel did was it formed an alliance with Greece and the Greek Republic of Cyprus. This is very, very important, very important. Its importance cannot be underestimated, because there you have attempts on each side to put buffers. Saudi has an alliance with Pakistan, and Turkey wants in that. So we're going to end up with a bunch of alliances that are going to be, arrayed against each other. And then it gets totally out of control. So I guess my petri dish for all this, Ilana, is in Syria, which is where the problem is brewing, needs to be solved. So, and that can be done, but the only way it can be done is with the intervention of the United States in a very, very affirmative and very strong way, which is not what we're not doing. It is not sufficient to go and say, which is Barrett quoted in the Wall Street Journal. It says basically, the original purpose of the SDF, the Kurds, as the primary anti-ISIS force on the ground has largely expired. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is just, excuse me, but madness. It's madness. It isn't rational. And if that's what I know, does the president endorse this? Ambassador is saying it. And it really shocked everyone. And it also shocks me as an American, because as an American, I don't think we do that. I don't think we do that. We don't leave our soldiers on the field, and we don't leave our allies on the field. We don't do that. And so I think right now the situation looks very, very, very bleak. But look, you'll remember after October 7th, the world was very bleak. And then, as I just had a speaker at the synagogue that I invited, and a member of Knesset, and he said, miracles, miracles. Look at all the miracles that we had. All these things that happened. And look, the situation Israel is in now today. Who would have envisioned it? So who knows? Maybe tomorrow there'll be something better. Anything else?
I don't see any more questions, but I'll give folks a minute to weigh in if they have everything else.
I know it was a lot of material. I know it was a lot of material. I hope it, I mean, I tried my best to give you a summary of a gigantically complicated issue, very, very complicated. Anything? Nothing? Nothing? Speechless? The AAJLJ is silent. I guess it means it was okay because, silence means assent, right? That was a basic cardinal thing we learned in law school. So, Alyssa, another question?
I think we're wrapping up in terms of
Okay, good.
we're almost
Yeah, we're almost
at
done
two.
anyway, right?
We definitely learned a lot.
Hopefully. There's no quiz. There's no quiz because
Please
I
now.
was actually teaching English in Turkey on a fellowship to Turkish professors. And, and the funny thing is I would come into the class, these are 25 Turkish professors, and I would tell them today, we're going Sınav, there's a test. And they freaked. They freaked out. They thought I'm giving them a test. Professors hate to get a test. So there's no test today. There's no quiz and no test whatsoever. But I hope that I sensitized you to when you read about this area, that you see that, and like with everything in this field, that there's so much at stake here. And then that's the problem that I have. And happily we do have lively journalists like the Wall Street Journal and so forth who are really calling out a lot of these things. And and I think I commend them for doing that. Even though the Wall Street Journal is very conservative, they do kind of speak the truth, speak truth to power, which is a very good thing. So
actually, it looks like there are two other comments.
Oh yeah. So so basically, look, Turkey's military is the second largest military in NATO. If you ask Israelis, if you look on Twitter, they'll go yeah, if we have a battle, we'll win. That's the Israeli idea. That's a really hard one to understand because, as I say, Turkey is a very formidable military force. How would that play out? I don't know the answer to it. It's what I would call a nightmare scenario. The remains of the last Israeli, yes. Oh, I mean, this is a very good question. We're supposed to go from phase 1 to phase 2. We're supposed to go doing things that were planned for Gaza and this peace board that we spoke about. And I think we are stuck. No, I don't think we have a clear path ahead to know where we're going next. Thank God it's not the hostage. It was the remains of a hostage who had been killed and murdered by these monsters, inhuman monsters, for whom people will walk around the world and go and picket and go and come to synagogues. I'm sorry, this is another subject, Rhonda and Alyssa. But the point is, this is what they support. So in a world like that, I think the idea of supporting truth and justice and virtue is very important. And that's why stating the cause of Israel and understanding why Israel is indispensable to the security and future of the Middle East. There is no one else. Who is going to, when the Druze were killed, Israel stepped in. They stopped it. And now with the Kurds, I should have mentioned, the latest thing that jihadis are doing is cutting the braids from the Kurdish women forces. So all the Kurdish women around the world and others in sympathy are all braiding their hair. So if you look on Twitter or X, you will see thousands of posts from women showing solidarity. And I think that this one is particularly sad because, as I said, the Kurds understand they're kind of smushed, is that an important legal term, or squished between all these great powers, and they're unable to assert, their national identity. Al-Shara told them they could have the language and they could have Nowruz, which is their holiday. That's what they're going to give them. And that's similar to what Turkey offered to the Kurds. You can have your language because there was no teaching of Kurdish in Turkey. But that's a whole other subject. At the end of the day, pursuing virtue and obviously our support for Medinat Yisrael is very, very important. It really is. It's pivotal to assure, a future for Israel and for the Jewish people around the world, no question. I hope that was a good ending.
Well, Alyssa, you're on mute, but I'll say thank you, Mark, very much. I think that's probably what she was saying as well.
That's
And thank
yes,
you, Alana.
I was yes. Well, want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, of course, to Dr. Meirowitz and to Ilana. And as Jewish lawyers, Holocaust remembrance carries, of course, a particular responsibility. We invite you to join us tomorrow for AAJLJ's Holocaust Remembrance Day program, Choiceless Choice, Law and the Tragedy of the Lodz Ghetto, with Professor Michael Basler. And of course, we note, as Mark mentioned, that the last hostage, the remains of the last hostage, was returned home. Alana, our 2024 recipient, had written every single day that the hostages are gone. So, Alana, how does it feel to get to the last day?
I took off my necklace that I've been wearing for 2 years, 2+ years, and it doesn't feel real yet. I think it'll set in later today, but it just feels like we'll finally all start to be able to heal. And I think that's really important.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you to everyone, and we'll see you all soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Hold on.
Bye.
So long, everyone. Thank you.